Hello everyone, this is a comprehensive samurai guide for dummies for the game Final Fantasy XIV. The target audience for this guide is going to be people who know nothing about samurai and want a step-by-step guide that will take them from 0 to 100 on being able to play the class successfully. What that means is it is going to be long and in-depth, so fair warning there. The guide will be current as of patch 6.11. We are halfway through the month of May 2022, so expect the guide to become dated, update to update as changes are made to the game. All right, with that said, we'll go into the overview. We're going to start with just an introduction to Samurai and its role in the party. We'll talk through general abilities, role abilities, then we'll get into the meat, which is going to be class abilities. We'll talk through the single target basics, the AoE basics. We'll go through the off-global cooldowns, and then we'll get into GCD rotation. We'll talk about the opener, and we'll talk about the Samurai loop. Then we'll go through some extras and some cleanup, and that will conclude the guide. So with that, let's go ahead and start with Samurai's role in the party. So the Samurai role in the party is DPS. Real quick, we'll start off by taking a look at how it shakes out with the other DPS classes. So here we are on FFF logs. We'll take a look at the statistics. I don't know why they use these scores, but we want the raw damage. So what you can see here is what this means. Essentially, the bottom line up front is all classes are pretty much the same for the most part. Damage classes. The game is well balanced. There really is no difference. If you really want to nerd out on it because it's fun, right now, as of May 15th, 2022, and this is the last 2 weeks of data, Ninja is sort of king of the hill. They are a perfectly played ninja is going to outdamage the other classes barely, followed by monk, and then it's a dead heat for third with samurai, black mage, and dragoon, and that is always fight specific when you're looking at this data. This is Hesperos Phase 2, but you can see that if we go to the other classes, you will see that ninja is top dog for basically all the fights. Here's P3. Ninja, followed by Monk, followed by Dragoon, and Black Mage, kind of all tied for third there. P2, same thing, and P1. And P1, same thing. But this difference is so minuscule that it just doesn't matter. Final Fantasy does a great job of balancing the classes. And all classes are viable for all content. The only exception for that, you can make a case for the first expansion, the first Savage tier of an expansion. There are some balance issues. So week 1 of Prague, if you're a world first racer, there might be a meta until they can fix any type of balancing issues. But outside of that, generally speaking, you can be successful in any class. So that being said, Samurai is a great class. You will hear people say that it is a selfish class, and the reason they say that is because Samurai does not have an ability that directly benefits the damage on all of its teammates. Monk has Brotherhood, Ninja has Mug, Dragoon has Battle Litany and Dragon Sight, Reaper has Arcane Circle, Summoner has Searing Light, Bard has Battle Voice, Red Mage has Embolden, and Dancer has like everything. But Samurai doesn't have anything, along with kind of Black Mage and I believe Machinist. So you'll hear people say that they're selfish classes, and it's true that it doesn't have an ability that benefits the damage of its teammates. But it does have, it does contribute to the team damage in kind of a roundabout way. If you look at ADPS, this is damage after buffs are applied. Samurai comes out ahead of the other classes, and this has historically been the case really for the last at least 2 expansions. Is Samurai does a lot of ADPS. Well, what does that mean? I will tell you what that means. Basically what that means is for ADPS, if you look at a fight, Samurai's damage, we'll take one that has a lot of uptime. Samurai's damage is disproportionately high during the burst windows. So if you take a look at this is the course of P1S. Typically, you're going to burst every 2 minutes, where everyone's going to hit their raid buffs, and you want to get as much potency as you can out underneath those raid buffs. And Samurai, the high ADPS of Samurai, basically it tells us that Samurai does this better than other classes. What does that mean? It means the peaks here are higher than other classes, and the valleys in between bursts is lower. So it's doing more damage during the Samurai does more damage during the bursts, less damage between the bursts, ultimately to even out and do the same amount of damage as the other classes. But the reason why that's a benefit is when Ninja has Mug out during these burst windows, and Ninja is getting credit for that extra damage that potency is doing inside that 15 seconds, or Monk with Brotherhood, or Red Mage with Embolden. When they hit those abilities, Samurai is able to pack more potency in those 15-second windows than the other classes. So if you're playing Ninja, you want your melee homie to be a Samurai, because they're going to actually increase your damage by putting more potency on your buff. So that is kind of the benefit that Samurai brings to the classes. Does it matter? No, it doesn't matter. But that is kind of how the devs have historically done the synergy for the Samurai class. And that's kind of it for the intro. It is a super fun class to play. I've been playing it for years. I love it. I don't like the fact that there's no more chitin. That really takes a lot of the flavor out of the class. But I always give the devs the benefit of the doubt because they have put together a really fun class to play. All right, with that, let's go ahead and get into the general role abilities. Okay, general role abilities. Before we get into that, just real quick, take a look at what I have for my HUD layout interface. As you can see, I've taken all the abilities off my bar. I'm going to put them on as I talk about them. But I like to play with as little of a HUD interface as possible, because I just like to look at the game, and that's my own personal preference. For this guide, however, I am going to change the layout to make it easier for you to see. So I got everything crammed down here and everything on the simplified versions of the gauges. So let's go ahead and change that. And now you'll be able to see everything that I'm doing. So for general abilities, the two general abilities you always want to have are going to be Sprint and Limit Break. Make sure you have these two on your bar at all times. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on general abilities or role abilities because they're common across classes. Second Wind, obviously a good sort of emergency heal, 500 potency. Leg Sweep, Stun, very important for solo play, and some raids like E8S when you can help the tank stun the ads. Bloodbath is a great ability to help ease takes the pressure off the healers for some healer checks. Feint got a huge buff. It now works on magical damage as well, so this is absolutely something you want to get used to using. True North is a great ability, especially as you start to get more advanced, because it allows you to, in specific parts of mechanics where you can't hit the positional, you could use True North and you will still get the potency buff off the positional. And then Arm's Length is probably the most important out of all of these. A lot of tactics for high-end content require that knockback immunity, which Arm's Length gives you, so that's definitely something that you want to have. And that's it for the general abilities and the role abilities. Again, not going to spend too much time on it because they are common. And now let's get into the Samurai-specific stuff. So the Samurai class is built off of, it basically has 3 resources that you manage. You build these 3 resources, and then you spend these three resources. Not very, not uncommon for an MMO class. The big one is Sen. Sen is the big one. All your global cooldowns, pretty much your global cooldown rotation is going to be generating Sen and then spending Sen. And then you have 2 other resources, Kenki and Meditate stacks. These are much, much less significant. They basically just give you something to do between global cooldowns. And we'll talk through all of those. So we'll start with Sen. So the way you build Sen is you have basically 3 skill chains that Samurai can do. And that the Gecko skill chain, the Kasha skill chain, and the Yukikaze skill chain. 3, and then 2 weapon skills respectively comprise these skill chains. And once you complete each of these skill chains, it gives you a Sen. So the first skill chain we're going to talk about is the Gecko skill chain. It opens with Hakaze. They all open with Hakaze, so you want to put Hakaze someplace on your bar that's very easily accessible. And the Gecko is Hakaze followed by Jinpu followed by Gecko. And that one looks like this. Hikaze, Jinpu, and Gecko. That is the first one. You'll notice that I got this buff when I did Jinpu. We'll talk about that later. You'll notice I did Gecko from behind because Gecko does have a positional, something else I will talk about later. But once I completed that skill chain, you'll notice I did get a Sen ability. This one is called Getsu, but I just call it the Blue Sen. And that is how you build the Blue Sen. The next the next skill chain that we're going to talk about is going to be the Kasha skill chain, and that also starts with Hikaze and then goes Hikaze, Shifu, followed by Kasha. And Kasha is my flank positional, which I'll talk about later, but this is how this one looks. Hikaze followed by Shifu, and then Kasha at the end. And that gives me the red Sen, and you'll see this also gave me a buff, which we'll talk about later as well. So that is how the second weapon skill chain, and now for the final skill chain, it's just Hikaze followed by Yukikaze, which is... Where's my Yukikaze? Should be right around level 50, I think. Here we go. And that's just 2. No positional on this one. And that gives me my third Sen. And that is how you build Sen in the Samurai class. All of them are on the global cooldown. All 3 of these skill chains are on the global cooldown, which will be important. Okay, so that's how you build Sen. Now let's talk about how we spend Sen. For single target, basically the way we spend Sen is with the Aijutsu ability. And that ability takes up 1 spot on your bar, and it changes based on the number of Sen you have. So it's a different ability for each Sen. It's got Higabana for 1 Sen, Tenken for 2 Sen, and Madare Setsugeka for 3 Sen. We're only interested in Higabana and Madare Setsugeka right now because we're only talking about single target damage. So I put Aijutsu on my bar in a readily accessible place because we are going to be using this a lot. And you'll notice that as soon as I put it on my bar, it immediately changed to Madare Setsugeka. The reason for that is because I am full on Sen. So if I wanted to spend this Sen with Madare, I come up to my target and I just hit it, and boom. I do Madare Setsugeka, which is the bread and butter of the Samurai class. You will be doing this ability a lot. So part of this, the other piece of this, the other option, is if I had 1 Sen, now my Aijutsu tab has changed to Higanbana. So I can spend that 1 Sen to do Higanbana. So let's talk about these 2 weapon skills. Madare Setsugeka, the bread and butter of the Samurai class, costs 3 Sen, and it is 640 potency. I believe it's a guaranteed crit, I think. Yes, it's a guaranteed critical hit, not a guaranteed direct hit, but a guaranteed critical hit, and you're going to be using that a lot. However, that being said, even though it's the bread and butter of the class, the highest DPS ability Samurai has right now is Higanbana. Higanbana is 1100 potency, which is almost double that of Setsugeka. But that damage is spread over the course of a damage over time effect. So the general rule for Higanbana is you always want to keep it up because you want to get as many Higabanas up on the boss as possible over the course of a fight, but you can't clip yourself, so you don't want to reapply it until it's fully depleted, and it has to tick for at least 42 seconds in order for it to be worth the resource usage, that in terms of time and the Sen. So you can see up here on the striking dummy, I've got Higanbana on the target. It's ticking down. You can see the damage is ticking down on the target as well. Bottom line is keep it up at all times, but never clip yourself. Always wait for it to fall off before you put it back on, and never apply it unless it can tick for 42 seconds. And that is how you essentially will use the Higanbana resource. And that's how you spend Sen for single target damage. Okay. With that, let's talk about some stuff that you saw and I mentioned earlier. The buffs. Samurai has 2 main buffs. It has Fugetsu and Fuka. Fugetsu is a 13% damage increase, which is substantial. That is a substantial damage increase. It is. You can get it from Jinpu, you can get it from Mengetsu, but that's AoE. We'll talk about that later. The other way you can get it is using Meikyo Shisui, which I will talk about later as well. Right now, just worry about Jinpu and just worry about that this thing exists. It's a huge damage bonus, and you want to keep it up at all times. You want to prioritize having your buffs up over any other GCD if your buffs ever fall off. The other one is going to be Fuka. Fuka is granted by Shifu, and also granted by Oka for the AoE, and again by Meikyo Shisui, which we'll talk about later. But this buff decreases the cast time, the recast time of your GCDs by 13%, which is substantial, and it lowers your auto attack display. So if you look, if you take a look at this here, you'll see that it says my recast time on Kasha is 2.48 seconds. But watch what happens to that recast time as soon as I put up Fuka. Okay, it dropped from 2.48 seconds to 2.15 seconds. That's a considerable drop, decrease in time. And the faster you can pump out weapon skills, the more damage you're going to do. So you want to keep Fuka up, and you want to keep Fugetsu up at all times. So what you want to see on your bar is basically, at all times, these two weapon skills directly next to each other. And as soon as one of them falls off, you want to immediately put it back on. And that and at all times. So, and we'll talk about how to do that later on. Okay, the next thing we'll talk about is, you heard me mention it before, is we'll talk about positionals. Samurai only has the two positionals, Kasha and Gecko. Gecko, you want to be standing behind the boss when you do it. Kasha, you want to be standing on the flank of the boss when you do it. The dividing line between the flank and behind is basically this little tick here that you see marked on the screen. As soon as that hitbox ends towards the back, as soon as you're past that towards the rear, you're in the rear, and as soon as you're forward of that, you're in the flank. So that's how you can determine where you're at for your positional. And if you hang out back there, it's a very, very small movement for both of those. So if you're just starting out, I wouldn't worry too much about positionals, but that is something, as you get more experience and you want to improve on the class, you will want to work into your playability. Okay, time for some practical application. We're going to take everything that we've talked about and put it into a little exercise. For this exercise, we will be focusing on 4 things. We'll be building Sen using our 3 skill chains. That's the Gecko skill chain, the Kasha skill chain, and the Yukikaze skill chain. We'll be looking to keep both of our buffs up. That's the Fugetsu and the Fuka buffs. We will look to keep Higebana on the target at all times. We'll refresh it, but we won't clip it, and we'll try and get it up as quickly as possible as soon as our buffs are up. And then we'll look to hit our positionals. That's just going to be the Gecko weapon skill and the Kasha weapon skill. So let's go ahead and give this a go. You can go ahead and stop the video if you want to practice it yourself, or you can just watch me do it. So here we go. First thing, I want to get my buffs up. I want to get my speed buff up first in this case, and then I want to get my damage buff up. As soon as my damage buff is up, I want to put on Higebana to the target. And there we go. I've got both my buffs up, and I've got Higebana on the target. I'm hitting my positionals. Here's my Kasha positional. And now I'm going to Setsugeka. Here's my Gecko positional. Kasha positional. And Yukikaze. Here's another Setsugeka. I've got 24 seconds left on Higebana. Gecko positional. Kasha positional. Yukikaze. Here's Setsugeka. And I see that my buff is about to fall off. I want to put it back on, so I will refresh Higebana. And then just right back to my rotation. Gecko positional. And Kasha positional. And we'll call it there. Okay, practical application complete. The next ability we're going to talk about is Meikyo Shisui. I'm just going to call it Meikyo. Let's take a look at the tooltip. Execute up to 3 weapon skill combos without meeting combo prerequisites. All that means is any weapon skill we have that has a combo bonus, we get that combo bonus without having to do the combo. Next part of the tooltip does not affect Iaijutsu or Ogi-Namakiri. We're going to talk about Ogi-Namakiri in a second, but the important thing here is any weapon skill that's an Iaijutsu weapon skill, so that's your Setsugeka or your Higedmana or Ogi-Namakiri, that does not count against one of your Meikyo uses. So one of your 3 uses, you can use an Iaijutsu weapon skill or Ogi-Namakiri without expending one, and that is very, very useful. Duration 15 seconds. The additional effect basically just reapplies your buffs using Gekko and Kasha instead of having to use Jinpu and Shifu, which is very useful. And then the 2 charges means you can use 2 Meikyos back to back, and you just get a charge every 55 seconds. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put Meikyo on my bar. I'm going to do 2 demonstrations. One is just going to be to build up Sen for Setsugeka, and then the second one I'm going to show how we can use, we can weave in that Iaijutsu without expending a charge. So here we go. Here's Meikyo. You see the Meikyo buff with the 3 uses, the 3 stacks. Full bonus for Gekko, full bonus for Kasha. It refreshed both of my buffs here, and then I'll do a Yukukazi, which gives me full Sen for a Setsugeka. The buff refreshing is very, very useful, but you notice I got my full combo bonus for every single one of those weapon skills I did. Now let's take a look at how we can use Iaijutsu in between without expending a charge. Here's Meikyo, my 3 charges. I'm going to do a Gekko. I'm going to do a Higedmana. I'm going to do a Kasha, and then I'm going to do a second Gekko off of the Meikyo. You're going to do this a lot because to maximize damage, to optimally play this class, you want to use every single Meikyo stack you can on either Gekko or Kasha. That is what is going to maximize damage for the Samurai class. So using Meikyo and using it correctly is a very important part of the class. It's a very flexible skill, and you will use it a lot. Okay. The next skill we're going to talk about is Tsubame Geisha. Now, this used to be a little bit more interesting when they first introduced it back in Shadowbringers and kind of before 6.11, but now they've changed it to really just kind of make it so that it's a direct duplication of any Iaijutsu that you do. So if you look at the tooltip, it just basically says repeats the previous executed Iaijutsu with increased potency. That is not correct. As of right now, it just does a direct replication. And again, it has 2 charges, and to get you get 1 charge every 60 seconds. So let's just take a look at this real quick. I'm going to put this on my bar. I'm going to use Meikyo to build up 3 Sen so that I can do Setsugeka. All right, now I've got my 3 Sen, so I'm going to do Setsugeka, and what you'll notice is Tsubame activates as soon as I do the Iaijutsu weapon skill, and I can use it, and I must use it immediately, otherwise I will lose the opportunity to use it. So there's Setsugeka. It lights up for Kaishi Setsugeka, and I can do back-to-back Setsugekas. You'll see that for my Midari Setsugeka, I got a critical direct hit, and for the Kaishi Setsugeta, I got a critical hit. The critical hit is guaranteed, the direct hit is not, so we got a little bit lucky there with that crit direct hit. And that's really it for Tsubame. I will say that Tsubame does work for on Higedmana. You can use Higedmana and then immediately do a Kaishi Higedmana. But the issue here is Kaishi Higedmana is basically a direct refresh of Higedmana at this point. And remember our rules for Higedmana. It needs to tick for 42 seconds in order for it to be worthwhile. So if I did Kaishi Higedmana, I basically just refreshed Higabana after only 15 seconds of the application. So that is not something that you want to do. And in some very obscure cases where you're going for some serious optimization, like in a, I don't know, like a Brute Justice Cruise Chaser scenario where you want to put Higabana on 2 different targets, maybe then it's worth it. But 99% of the time, you're going to want to use every Tsubame in a single target scenario off of Setsugeka. And that is pretty much it for Tsubame. The next thing we're going to talk about is our big hit, the Samurai level 90 ability, which is Ogi Namakiri. So Ogi Namakiri is a 2-minute ability, but it's kind of used a little bit differently than a 2-minute ability. You'll notice it has no cooldown, and that is because you can only use Ogi Namakiri when you have the Ogi Namakiri ready buff. And the way we get that buff is by using Iki Shoten. So let's take a look at Iki Shoten. Iki Shoten does 2 things. It gives you 50 Kenki, which is nice, and it gives you the Ogi Namakiri ready buff, and the recast time is 120 seconds. So this is our burst ability. So let's take a look at how this works. I'm going to put Iki Shoten on my bar. I'm going to put Ogi Namakiri on my bar. And now you'll see that when I use Iki Shoten, I will automatically get the Ogi Namakiri buff. So let's do that. Remember, you have to be in combat for this to work. So now I've got my Ogi Namakiri buff, and Ogi Namakiri is lit up. And as soon as I use Ogi Namakiri, it's going to, as you can see there, action changes to Kaishi Namakiri upon execution. And then I need to use Kaishi Namakiri immediately, or I will lose it completely. So you have to use these 2 back-to-back. So let's do that. Ogi Namakiri, you see it's changed to Kaishi Namakiri, and you use it again for another 800 potency. And then for anything else it hits, it's 200 potency on anything other than your main target. And that's really it for our big hit. Again, once every 120 seconds, and that will be our main burst as part of our 2-minute burst. And now it is time for a practical application. Okay, practical application time. Very simple exercise here. All we're going to do is use Meikyo to generate Sen as quickly as possible so we can do a Setsugeka immediately followed by a Kaishi Setsugeka using Tsubame. We're going to do that twice, and we're going to weave in an Iki Shoten at some point so that we can finish with a Namakiri Kaishi Namakiri combo. Iki Shoten is off the global cooldown. Meikyo is off the global cooldown. So you want to weave those abilities in between global cooldowns when you need to use them. The last thing I'll say before we start is Iki Shoten and Namakiri, you use them once every 2 minutes. So do not give them prime real estate on your hotbar. It's not like a Hikaze, Shifu, Kasha, Gecko, Jinpu, where you're hitting those buttons constantly, multiple times per minute. Namakiri and Iki Shoten do not need prime real estate. Okay, so you can pause the video and do that, or you can just watch me do it, and here we go. And finishing with Namakiri. And that is it. Okay, so we have talked about building Sen and using Sen. We've talked about several of our major abilities. It is time to talk about the other resources that we have available to us that I mentioned at the beginning, that being Kenki and Meditate stacks, and we will begin with Kenki. So for Kenki, almost everything generates Kenki. We have that little sword indicator that tells us how much Kenki we have. Kenki directly translates to damage, so the key with Kenki is you just never want to overcap it. You always want to be spending it at the appropriate time when it's available without overcapping. So we have essentially three Kenki spenders for single target DPS. The primary one is Hisatsu Shinten. Shinten, there's no cooldown on it. It's off the global cooldown. It costs 25 Kenki, and using it basically does a weapon skill. It's an ability off the global cooldown that is a 250 potency attack. This is our primary Kenki spender. The other Kenki spenders we have for single target is one is Hisatsu Sene. Sene is the exact same Kenki cost as Shinten, only it's 800 potency. So it's more than 3 times the damage, but it has a 120-second cooldown. So Shinten is our Kenki spender that we will only use in our 2-minute burst. So not very often, but not as often as Shinten, but we always want to use it during our 2-minute burst. The last one is Gyuten. Gyuten is our gap closer. It's very situational. You typically are only ever going to use your gap closer when you can gain a global cooldown in a fight. Otherwise, it's a DPS loss, but nevertheless, it is a Kenki spender. So let's go ahead and put those on our bar. Shinten, I'm going to give prime real estate to Shinten because we are going to be using this ability a lot. Sene does not need prime real estate. Again, we're only using it during our burst sequence every 2 minutes. So put it in a place where you can very comfortably weave that into your burst. And then Gyuten, I talked about it, so I'll put it on my bar. But we're not really going to do anything with it in this demo. So now that we've added our Kenki spenders, let's take a look at kind of what that looks like. So anytime we get close to capping Kenki, we want to make sure we use a Shinten or a Sene to prevent from capping. So there's 90. I'm going to use a Sene to keep myself below the cap. And there's a Shinten. Here's another Shinten, and you'll notice how I'm weaving it in between global cooldowns, so it's not taking me off, it's not affecting my rotation. It's just it's used as an OGCD to keep my Kenki from capping, and that's it. Very, very easy, but because it's such a critical part of the samurai rotation and playing the class, we are going to do a practical application for it. Okay, this exercise will be identical to the first exercise with the addition that we will be monitoring our Kenki using Sene and Shinten to prevent overcapping. So, we will be building Sen using our 3 skill chains, Gekko, Kasha, and Yukikaze. We'll be keeping our buffs up, Fugetsu and Fuka. We'll keep Higanbana on the target. We will be hitting our positionals, which is Gekko and Kasha, and we will be weaving in Shinten and Sene as required in between GCDs to manage our Kenki and keep it from overcapping. So you can pause the video now and give it a try, or you can just watch me do it. So here we go. I want to get my speed buff up first. I want to get my damage buff up second. Now I can go ahead and apply Higanbana. Okay, I'm looking at my Kenki. My Kenki is starting to get high, so I want to make sure I don't overcap it. I'm going to go ahead and use Sene. And I just weaved in 2 Shintens to drop my Kenki very quickly. 25 Kenki per use. And I personally like to keep my Kenki around 30, but again, that's just personal preference. And every time it kind of gets up to about the 50 range, I'm just hitting Shinten to bring it back down around the area where I like it. All right, Higanbana fell off, so let's reapply it. And that's it. Okay, the last resource we're going to talk about are our meditate stacks. Meditate is, you can hold up to 3 stacks. The generators are any Iaijutsu, so that's Madara, Setsugeka, and Higanbana for a single target. Ogi Namakiri generates a meditate stack, and then the actual meditate ability itself generates 3 meditate stacks. It is a channel, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Our meditate spender for a single target is going to be Shoha. Fantastic attack, 520 potency, so it's very potent. It is off the global cooldown, so we will be weaving it, just like we weave Shinten, just like we weave Sede. We will be weaving Shoha in between global cooldowns so that we don't disrupt our rotation. And that is it. So let's go ahead and take a look at Meditate. So for Meditate, it gradually increases your Kenki gauge. It gives you 50 Kenki over the course of 15 seconds, and it gives you 3 stacks of Meditate in slightly less than 15 seconds. The issue with it is this: you cannot move while you are meditating, and you cannot run your rotation. You just have to be completely stationary, hands off the keyboard, just letting it do its thing, which means that it's only usable when you can't be running your rotation and doing damage to the boss. So essentially in a fight where the boss goes untargetable, or you're running a mechanic where you have to be outside of melee range, those are the situations under which you will want to use Meditate. Typically speaking, it isn't not required for any fight to be successful for the most part, but it is kind of cool, and if you do want to optimize, you are going to want to find places to use it when you can't be doing damage. The only fight I've ever done where I was like, man, I'm really glad I have Meditate right now, was Alex. But other than that, it's a cool ability and it looks cool. So we will go ahead and demo it here. So I'm going to put Meditate on my bar. I am not going to give it good real estate at all because I do not use it very often. And then the other thing we need to add to our bar right now is going to be Shoha, which is our spender. We've already got Namakiri and Aijutsu on our bar, so we don't need to worry about that. Shoha, I am going to give prime real estate to because you need to be able to weave that thing in at the appropriate time in order to ensure you do not overcap on your Meditate stacks, because that is a damage loss every time you overcap. Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead and demo kind of what this looks like. Actually, we're going to start with Meditate. So let's take a look. Let's enter combat, and let's Meditate. That's the animation there, and you can kind of see it building up here. So over the course of 15 seconds, I'm going to get 15 Kenki. Notice that at the 9-second mark, I've already capped. So as long as you meditate for 9 seconds, you will cap on your Meditate stacks. Okay, so there was that. Now let's go ahead and do a Soha. Pretty cool animation, and that's 520 potency. Now let's go ahead and run something of a rotation so that we can kind of see how this thing gets generated. Setsugeka gets me a stack. Higenbana gives me a stack. Namakiri gives me a stack. And now I have full stack, so I'm going to use it. And then I'm just running a normal rotation. I get a stack every time I do an IA Jutsu. Tsubame does not give me a stack. And that's it. So basically what this turns into is you're running your normal rotation. Every time you cap on Meditate stacks, you're going to hit Shoha. Don't double weave, but hit Shoha. And then when you're not hitting Shoha and you need to control your Kenki, you're hitting a Shinten or a Sene. And that basically turns into the Samurai rotation. So we are going to do a practical application exercise for this so that we can practice. Okay, for this exercise, in addition to everything that we did in the previous exercise, we're now also going to be monitoring our meditation stacks and using Shoha to ensure that we do not overcap on meditation stacks. So we're not going to be using Meikyo, we're not going to be using Tsubame, we're not going to be using Namakiri. We will save all that for later. Right now, we are just going to stick with the basics, monitoring our resources, building our Sen, and doing everything that we've been practicing. So you can go ahead and pause the video now if you like, or you can just watch me do it. And here we go. Once again, speed buff up first, damage buff up second, Higaban on the target, and then we're just monitoring our resources. Okay, on my next Setsugeka, I know that I'm going to have 3 meditation stacks, so I'm ready to use Shoha. Just like that. I like to use it right away. Personal technique. Higginbonet's about to fall off, so we'll reapply it. I'm at 2 meditation stacks, so I'm ready after my next Sektugeka to use Shoha again. And that is it. We will come back to single target towards the end of the guide as we get to the more advanced stuff in the actual looping rotation and opener. But for now, we're going to transition to AoE abilities and skills for the samurai. So AoE operates just like single target. We have 3 resources that we still need to manage: Sen, Kenki, and meditation stacks. The only difference now is we're using different abilities, skill chains, and weapon skills to build those resources and then spend those resources. So we will start with Sen. For Sen, there are only 2 skill chains. Each skill chain has 2 weapon skills, and each skill chain results in a Sen being granted, Getsu and Ka. We only ever need 2 Sen for our AoE rotation because our IA Jutsu ability that we use for AoE only requires 2 Sen. There is no AoE ability that will generate the green Sen. Only Yukikaze generates that. So these skill chains are 2 weapon skills each. They both start with Fuko, and they both end with Mengetsu and Oka, respectively, for those skill chains. The great thing about Mengetsu and Oka is they both apply, as a combo bonus, they both apply our buffs, our damage buff and our speed buff, which basically means we almost never have to worry about, we never have to worry about those buffs ever falling off. So we will use these skill chains to build that resource, and then once we have built our 2 Sen resource, we will spend Sen using Tenka Goken, which is our IA Jutsu for our AoE. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. Here are the abilities. So now I need to put Fuko on my bar. In the actions list, Fuka appears as Fuga because there's a trait called Fugo Mastery that you get at 86 that upgrades Fuga to Fuko. So just put Fuga on the bar where you want Fuko, and it will automatically change as assuming you're above level 86. So I will give that prime real estate because you use it very often when you're doing your AoE rotation. And then the last 2 abilities we need on our bar are of Mengetsu, which I will also give prime real estate, again, because you use them a lot during your AoE rotation, and Oka. And this gives us our ability to do our two skill chains. So let's take a look at those skill chains. I'm going to open with Fuko, and then I'm going to hit Mengetsu. You can see I got my Sen as well as my buff. Now I'm going to do the other skill chain. Here's Fuko, followed by Oka. I got my speed buff along with my red Sen. And you can see my IA Jutsu transition to Tenka Goken because Tenka Goken is going to be the only IA Jutsu you ever use. So I will hit that. And that's the core of the AoE rotation. You use your 2 skill chains to build Sen, and then you use Tenka Goken. Now let's talk about how Meikyo fits into this. So Meikyo, remember, it whenever you spend a stack of Meikyo on a weapon skill, that weapon skill gets all the combo bonuses without actually having to do the combo. So for Oka, that means you're going to get full potency. It's going to give you your buff, and it's going to increase the Kenki gauge by 10, and most importantly, it's going to give you that red Sen. And then Mengetsu, similar situation. So the benefit, though, and what makes it a little bit different than the single target, is because you're only ever generating 2 Sen, but you get 3 stacks of Meikyo. Basically what that means is when you use Meikyo, you can immediately build up enough to do a Tenka Goken, and you've still got a Meikyo stack left over because Tenka Goken is one of the exceptions. It's an IA Jutsu. It does not use a stack of Meikyo. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So here we go. I'm going to hit Meikyo. I got my three stacks. I'll come in. I'll do an Oka. I'll immediately do a Mangetsu, and then I'll do a Tenka Goken. It does not spend my stack of Meikyo, so I can do another Oka. And now I'm already halfway to doing another Tenka Goken, which allows you to pump out a lot of Tenka Gokens when you're using Meikyo. The last thing we'll talk about here with this is the Tsubame. So Tsubame Geshi, remember, all it does is replicate the IA Jutsu that you just did. So since we're only ever doing Tenka Goken, Tsubame in the AoE rotation is only ever going to be Keishi Goken. So what does that look like? So I come in here, I'll go ahead and give myself another Sen real quick. Oops. There we go. I'll give myself a blue Sen. I'll hit my Tenka Goken. And you see that my Tsubame has turned into Keishi Goken, and I'll hit that. And that right there forms the core of basically everything that you're going to be doing in terms of your global cooldown rotation with AoEs. And now with that, it is time for a practical application. Okay, simple exercise. All we're going to do is use both our Meikyo charges to do 3 Tenka Gokens in a row, back to back to back. We will follow up the first 2 with a Keishi Goken using our Tsubame charge, but remember we only have 2 Tsubame charges, so you'll notice that after the 3rd Tenka Goken, we will not be able to use Tsubame for an additional Keishi Goken. The one thing I really want you to practice in this exercise is after that first Tenka Goken, and immediately followed by either an Oka or a Mangetsu, you need to practice weaving in your second cast of Meikyo so that you do not have a break in your global cooldown before you start your next weapon skill and then go into your final 2 Tenka Gokens. So you can stop the tape now and give that a go, or you can just watch me do it. So here I go. I'm going to pre-hit my Meikyo. I got my 3 charges. I'll start with Mangetsu into Oka. Here's my Tenka Goken, followed by Keishi Goken. Into another Mangetsu with a weave. Here's my weave. Oka. Second Tenka Goken. Keishi Goken. And I've still got 2 charges left for a Mangetsu and an Oka. And then my final Tenka Goken. And that's it. That concludes the exercise. Okay, that covers Sen. Let's talk about Kenki. Fuko, Mangetsu, and Oka all generate Kenki. So anytime you're running your AoE rotation, you're going to be constantly generating Kenki, and the same principle as single target applies. You just never want to overcap it. So you want to use your Kenki spenders to prevent that overcap from happening, and your Kenki spenders for your AoE rotation are Hisatsu Kyuten and Hisatsu Garen, and they are identical to Shinten and Sene. So Kyuten, low damage for 25 Kenki, but no cooldown. Hisatsu Garen, high damage for 25 Kenki, but a 2-minute cooldown. So you'll use Garen, and then while Garen's on cooldown, anytime you need to clear Kenki, you'll be using Kyuten. So let's go ahead and take a look at where we're going to put these on our bar. So I put them here and here. You can put them wherever you want, and then you just use them essentially to clear Kenki just as you would Shinten and Sene. So we'll go ahead and start combat here. I'm going to go ahead and use Iki Shoten to kind of put myself in a Kenki extremis, and then I'm just going to start doing the AoE rotation. And the key is you just don't want to cap. And they are both OGCDs, just like Shinten and Sene. So you'll use them off the global cooldown so that you never break your global cooldown. And I'm just kind of doing random stuff here. And that is pretty much it for those two. And now let's do a practical application. Okay, for this exercise, we're going to do exactly what we did for the previous exercise, but we're going to keep the rotation going and we're going to be using our Garen and our Kyutin to ensure that we never cap our Kenki. So here we go. All right, here's my first Tenka. About to weave here, weave my Meikyo, another Tenka. I'm gonna go ahead and hit Garen there. Third Tenka. And now I just want to make sure I don't cap on my Kenki. And that's it. Okay, the last resource that we need to talk about are meditation stacks. Meditation stacks, same principle as single target. You just don't want to overcap them. So as soon as you have 3, you want to make sure you use them. The abilities that generate stacks in the AoE rotation are Tenka Goken and Ogi Namakiri. Once you have 3, you want to make sure you use your spender, which is Shoha 2. And then you want to make sure you are weaving Shoha 2 in between global cooldowns where you are not weaving something else. So let's take a look at that. So Shoha 2, I put it on my bar right here. And then I'm just going to do some random stuff to just sort of demonstrate weaving in Shoha 2. So you can see I'm never capping my Kenki. I'm never overcapping my my meditation stacks. And I'm keeping my buffs up at all times. And that's really it. It's not really complicated at all. And there we go. And let's do another practical application. Okay, this exercise will be same as the last, except we will be adding in the meditation stack management. So we'll be using Meikyo to do 3 consecutive Tenka Gokens with as many Keishi Gokens as we can get. We'll be keeping our buffs up. We'll keep the rotation going for a little bit, and we will be weaving Kaiten and Garen to manage Kenki, and we will be weaving Shoha 2 to manage our meditation stacks. So you can either pause the video now and give it a go, or you can just watch me do it. All right, so let's give this a go. Here's my weave for my Meikyo. I'm gonna go ahead and sneak Garen in there. And here comes my second Tenka, which means Soha is gonna be available. So we'll go ahead and use it. And that is it. We'll go ahead and do one more Shoha before we call it. And here it is. And there it is. And that is it. Okay, here is the AoE final exam exercise. It's pretty much exactly what we've been doing, only we're adding in Iki, Shoten, and Namakiri, and a few other considerations. So, we're going to open with Meikyo to get the buffs up in the first 2 GCDs. We want to weave in Iki Shoten to gain the Namakiri ready buff, as well as some Kenki for Garen. We want to use Garen as soon as possible, weave it in, so that we can put it on cooldown with the buffs being up. And then we're going to weave Makyo to continue our Tinka Goken spam. We'll use Namakiri before the buff falls off. We want to do all of that without overcapping on Kenki or overcapping on meditation stacks. So you can pause the video and give that a go, or you can just watch me give it a try. So here we go. Pre-pull with Makyo. There's Garen. First Tinka Goken. Here's my Makyo weave. Second Tinka Goken. Final Tinka Goken's coming up. We're going to have Shoha ready. We want to use it right away, straight into Namakiri. And that is it. We did not cap on Kenki. We did not cap on meditation stacks, and we did not delay any of our global cooldowns to get all our Tinka Gokens out. And that is it. That is the final exam for your AoE. Some final thoughts on AoE before we get on to the rest of the guide. The balance guide for Samurai has like one paragraph dedicated to AoE, and the reason for that is there really is no requirement, AoE requirement in high-end contact that would require any type of optimization. Most of the time that you're going to be using AoE is going to be in dungeons or in solo duties for like the MSQ, things of that nature, events. There's really high-end rating does not really require an optimized AoE rotation for any of the classes, so you don't really need to put in a lot of focus. If you did the final exercises in this guide, you are already exceeding the requirement for any of the AoE content in this game. It is fun, it's fun to do, but the reality is it's just not really necessary. And when you do the content that does require AoE, everything is so haphazard because typically you're going to be chasing the tank while you're simultaneously doing, weapon skills. You're going to be overcapping on resources because you can't get everything out because you're moving. All your cooldowns are going to be in weird places because bosses die at different times. Your cooldown is in a different place for each backup mob you kill based off of how fast you're going. And there just really is no... everything is ad hoc, basically, about the AoE rotation. So don't spend a whole lot of time on it. It's fun to learn the class and do all the cool AoE abilities that you have with the class. But the reality is there's really no reason to try and optimize or practice it. Just do it, have fun, and yeah, that's pretty much it for AoE content. Okay, with AoE complete, we transition back to single target damage. We're getting to the point in the guide where everything is going to start coming together. So let's take a look at the Samurai Standard Opener. This is the opener straight off of the balance. There have been a few changes with the loss of chitin, but more or less it remains the same. You will see there are some gaps between the GCDs. That gives you some flexibility in terms of where you put the Shintens. For player preference, you'll see that I make two very small changes to this when I do it. I'm going to go through it in slow motion and talk through it as I'm going through it. But a few things from the beginning. The big thing here is you're getting your buffs out on global cooldown 1 and 2, and you're getting the tincture out right there with them in the first OGCD slot, and then you want to get all this potency out underneath that tincture. So by global cooldown 15, that Keishi Setsugeka, your tincture is expiring just after you get that GCD off. The pre-pull, Meikyo Shisui and True North, they don't necessarily have to be done right at -9 and -5. You can wait a little bit. It's not going to hurt anything, but you do definitely need to make sure you do that pre-pull because you're opening with Gecko and Kasha. So with that, I'll talk through it in real time as I go through it in slow motion, and yeah, we'll give it a go. Make sure you have your pot on your bar, as I do, and here we go. I add Sprint to my pre-pull. That's not a requirement. You only need Meikyo and True North, but that's just something that I do. I'll hit Meikyo and True North, so I'm ready to go, and then I'll go ahead and start. Obviously, you want to align this to the countdown, but there's no countdown here, so we'll just get right into it. I open with Gecko. This puts my damage buff up. I'll hit my Tincture, and then I will hit Kasha, which puts my speed buff up. Iki Shoten comes directly after, followed by Yukukazi. I will add a Shinten after this Yukukazi, so I don't have to do it later. And then I will go into my Setsugeka, Sene, Kashe Setsugeku combo, immediately following which I'll, in the OGCD after that Kashi Setsugeka, I'll do my second Meikyo. I'll hit a Gecko followed by another Shinten, and then I'll go into my Higginbana. I will not do a Shinten after Higginbana. That's the one that I did earlier, and I'll go straight into my Ogi Namakiri. I will move my Shoha to after Kaishi Namakiri. That's just personal preference. Doesn't really matter. And then there you can see it going out now. Then I'll hit my Kasha followed by a Shinten. As I transition to the back, I'll hit Gecko followed by Goiten, and now I'm right back with the balance guide. I'll do my Hakazi followed by Yukukazi. As soon as Yukukazi goes out, I get my last 25 Kenki of the opener, and I'll immediately spin it on a Shinten before I do the final Setsugeka, Kashi Setsugeka, and you will see that the Kashi Setsugeka damage goes out just before the tincture falls off, which is exactly what we're looking for here. And there goes the tincture. So that is it. That is the opener. Two small changes from what I normally do. Now what we'll do is we'll just watch it in real time. Okay, let's bring it all together. A few opener final thoughts. First, master the opener. The preponderance of your practice time should be on the opener. Master it. If you master the opener, everything else about the rotation of this class and playing this class will fall into place very quickly. So practice, practice, practice the opener. One more thing on the opener. The reason Goiten is in the opener is because the damage per Kenki spent is equivalent to Shinten. That was a change, and we want to get all our Kenki that we generate in the opener out while the grade 6 tincture of strength is active. And if we don't have the Goiten in there, we cannot do that. The tincture will fall off and we'll have 10 extra Kenki. That's why the Goiten is there, is for that tincture. It's not for the actual gap closer. Okay, enough about the opener. Let's talk about the rotation. What you're looking at is the Samurai rotation loop cheat sheet that the balance generated. Amazing product, everything you need to know about playing this class and executing this rotation. You'll see the loop itself down at the bottom where it says simple full loop, and all it is these 5 set GCD sequences, and we order them so that we can do this loop over and over and over to infinity. So let's take a look at these sequences. We've already talked about the opener. Let's go on to the cooldown phase. The cooldown phase is a set 17 global cooldowns. 17 global cooldowns. All you're doing is you're building 3 Sen, you're doing Setsugeka, and you're building 3 more Sen. You can build the Sen in any order. You want to do Kasha first, do Kasha first. You want to do Gecko first, do Gecko first. It doesn't matter. Just build Sen, do a Setsugeka, build more Sen, that's it. 17 global cooldowns. And all you're doing with the cooldown phase is you're just marking time to the next burst phase. And that's what that is for. Let's the next 2 phases, odd minute burst, even minute burst. For the odd minute burst, you're using all your 1-minute burst abilities. That's going to be your Tsubame, your Meikyo, your Higabana refresh, and you're using your Meikyo just as we did earlier to refresh Higabana in such a way that you're not wasting a Meikyo charge on Yukukazi. Once that's done, you do a full Yukukazi skill chain and finish with the Setsugeka. Odd minute burst is 9 global cooldowns. The even minute burst is the odd minute burst plus our 2-minute abilities. That's going to be our Sene, which is an OGCD, but it's also going to be our Namakiris, our Ogi Namakiri and our Kaishi Namakiri, which is going to add 2 global cooldowns to that burst phase. So the even minute burst phase is 11 global cooldowns. So why am I harping on these global cooldowns? Because this is going to determine the last sequence, which is our filler sequence. Real quick, let's do a quick aside about why this matters. Samurai can be played in different skill speed tiers. If you look at it, you'll hear people say slow Sam, fast Sam. What that means is, what skill speed are they playing at? I play at the 2.14 skill speed, which is considered slow Sam. That is what I recommend, and that is what I'm going to be focusing on. But for a 2.14 skill speed samurai, a slow samurai, they're going to do 28 global cooldowns per 60 seconds. A 2.07 skill speed Sam is going to do 29, and a 2.0 or a fast Sam is going to do 30. Why this matters is that means we need to fill 28 global cooldowns between our 1 minute abilities and double that for our 2 minute abilities. So when we use Tsubame or a Kaishi Setsugeka 28 cooldowns later, it's going to come off cooldown. So we need to fill those cooldowns. The reason slow Sam is so great is because the cooldown phase is 17 GCDs. And the even burst phase is 11 GCDs, which is exactly 28. So we don't need filler. It ends up working out perfectly. But for the odd burst phase, in our odd minutes, the odd burst phase is only 9 global cooldowns, which puts us at 26. So when we finish that cooldown, we're going to be 2 GCDs short of our abilities coming off cooldown. And we won't be, and we need to fill those with something, and that is why we have the filler phase. So here's what the balance came up with: the guide to the filler phase. For slow Sam, we only need to add filler to the minutes where we're doing the odd minute burst. But if we're any other type of Sam, so the fast Sam or the 2.07 skill speed Sam, they actually have to add filler to both minutes, and the filler is different. So that is why I prefer slow Sam, and that is what I recommend. So coming back to the loop, looking down at the bottom, we do our opener. We do our cooldown. That will take us straight to our odd minute burst because all our big hits are still on cooldown. We'll do our odd burst. We will see that we need a filler, so we'll add filler. Then we'll go into our cooldown, which will take us straight to our even burst. We do not need filler for this minute, because we did the even burst, which is a full 11 global cooldowns. So we go straight back into our cooldown, and then that takes us back to our odd minute burst, and we just do that for infinity. And I'm going to demo that. One thing I am going to talk about is checkpoints on your Higebana damage over time ability. You want to start the cooldown phase at about 42-43 seconds left on Higebana. If you do that, you will hit the next burst window perfectly with no drift. And I will show you that. The other checkpoint is as you're doing the Setsugeka in the cooldown phase, you want to see about 22-23 seconds left on Higebana. Use those 2 checkpoints to see where you're at in your rotation. And that will help you. The last thing we're going to talk about is the filler phase itself. Taking a look at it, notice that ability, Hagakure. Hagakure clears your sen. So for the filler, as slow Sam, we're going to do our Yukikaze skill chain, so Hagazi Yukikaze, and which is going to give us a green sen, which we're immediately going to clear with Hagakure. And that is an ability we have not put on our bar yet, so let's do that right now. Hagakure right here, all it does is converts whatever sen you have into Kenki, and you get 10 Kenki for each sen cleared. I will put this, I won't give it prime real estate, but I will give it accessible real estate. We will be using it once every 2 minutes, and that is it. So I am going to, let's double check this. I'm going to put my Higebana right next to my character, and so I can talk you through what I'm doing and how I use Higebana to see where I am at in my rotation. And now that is basically it for how to run the Samurai rotation. I am going to now demo it and talk through it as I demo it. So here we go. We start with the opener. Okay, we're wrapping up our opener. And you can see the Higabana buff is directly next to me. I am starting my cooldown phase right now at 42 seconds on Higabana. That is perfect. That means my cooldown phase will take me directly to my odd minute burst. That's my first Setsugekko right at 22 seconds. That's my second checkpoint. So I know I am right on my rotation. All right, now I'm finishing up the cooldown phase. And I'm going to be starting my odd minute burst phase. And everything's coming off cooldown perfectly. Boom, Tsubame, Meikyo, into Gecko to perfectly refresh Higabana. And then a Kasha into another Gecko so I don't waste the Meikyo charge on Yukukaze. I'll do one more Yukukaze, and now I will finish my odd minute burst. And now notice I'm starting I had to start my cooldown phase at 48 seconds. That's no good, so I added the filler in there. I did the 2 global cooldowns, Hikaze, Yukukaze, and then I did Hagakure to clear it, and that put me right at 42 seconds. "24 seconds coming out of the second Setsugekka, that's just fine. That's perfect. So I know I'm going to go into my even minute burst phase right on time. I'm going to go ahead and hit Iki Shoten now. And here comes my even minute burst phase. Perfect refresh of Higabana. And now here are my Namakiris. "50 seconds, and I'm going to do one more Setsugekka, which puts me 44 seconds. That's fine. 44 seconds is perfect. I will not need filler going into the next odd minute burst. "24 seconds starting the second Setsugekka set. That's perfect. All right, now we are starting our odd minute burst again. Perfect refresh. Finish our Meikyo charges. Here comes our Setsugekka. Looking at our time. 49 seconds. We do need the filler, so here it is. Yukukaze, Hagakure, filler complete, starting our cooldown phase at 43 seconds. Perfect. And this will take me straight to the next even burst. "23 seconds, that's perfect. I'm going to use Iki Shoten now, so I'm ready. And here we go, even burst. Finishing my even burst at 44 seconds, that's just fine, no filler required. And now we would go straight into our cooldown and go straight into our odd minute burst, and we can do this to infinity. And that is it. Okay, let's wrap it up. There are 3 remaining abilities for us to talk about, and we will talk about them right now. The first one is Impi. Impi is the Samurai's range attack. 100 potency can be increased to 260 potency with the enhanced Impi buff, and it is a Kenki generator. This is a very useful ability. Anytime you are off the boss, out of melee range and the boss is still targetable, maybe because of a mechanic, you can basically spam MP in order to generate Kenki and to at least continue damage. The next ability we'll talk about is going to be Yaten. Yaten, you won't use this quite as much as MP. It is the Samurai Backstep. It grants enhanced MP, so you can get that damage bonus on MP if you use MP within 15 seconds after using Yaten. It is a Kenki spender, so it does cost 10 Kenki to use. But the real benefit of Yaten is how you use it in conjunction with MP and Goiten. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So let's say we are on the boss and we need to backstep. So maybe there's a point blank AoE or a tank buster we need to avoid. We can just immediately hit our backstep. It does 100 potency and it grants us the enhanced MP buff. We can then use MP and then immediately gap close back in towards the boss if the danger is cleared. It's actually a super fun ability. It isn't optimal in a lot of situations. It's hard to find a situation where it's optimal in high-end content, but it's super fun and they do exist, so it is definitely a tool in our toolkit. Very, very fun. And it's also very fun in solo play, but the place I have the most fun with it is actually in MSQ solo duties. That is the place to use it. So that leaves us with one final ability to talk about, and that is going to be the greatest ability. Oh yes, Third Eye. Third Eye is our last ability. It gets prime real estate because it has a 15-second recast, and it is an amazing ability. It reduces incoming damage for the next attack by 10%, and it increases your Kenki gauge by 10. So it's damage reduction, and it increases your damage. It's a phenomenal ability. You will want to use this for every single raid wide in whichever fight you are participating in. And that it will ease pressure on the healers as well as increase your damage. You will be using this 3, sometimes 4 times a minute. That's 30 to 40 Kenki per minute, which translates into a Shinten, more than a Shinten worth of damage. So it's a great ability. Use it. Make it second nature. Use it on every single raid wide, on cooldown if you can. And yes, I personal opinion, what separates good samurai from great samurai is Third Eye usage and True North usage. And that's it. That concludes the guide. Hopefully you found it informative. If you're new to the samurai class, welcome. It's a super fun class to play. I really enjoy it. That's all I've got for the guide. So if you have any questions, you can always DM me on Discord, and maybe we'll see each other in game.